The only thing more dangerous than crossing Violet Cain was trying to tell her what to do. And Vernon Drake learned that truth the moment she stepped into his remote mountain trading post in the Wyoming Territory with a Winchester rifle and eyes that could cut through solid granite. "You selling ammunition, or just standing there looking ornamental?" she asked, her green eyes sweeping over his 6'4" frame with the kind of scrutiny usually reserved for livestock auctions. Vernon straightened from where he had been sorting through beaver pelts, his weathered hands stilling as he took in the woman before him. She could not have been more than 22, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical braid and dust coating her split riding skirt. Most women traveling through these parts in the summer of 1878 came with husbands or fathers. This one stood alone, and she wore that independence like armor. "Got ammunition," he said, his deep voice rumbling through the dim interior of his post. "What caliber you need?" "44-40, she replied, stepping closer to the counter. "And before you ask if I know how to use it, save your breath. I have been shooting since I was 10 years old." Vernon felt the corner of his mouth twitch. "Was not going to ask. Sure you were not." She set the rifle down on his counter with practiced ease. "Every man I have encountered in the last 300 miles has questioned whether I know which end the bullet comes out of. Maybe you have been talking to the wrong men. That is an understatement if I ever heard one." She pulled a leather pouch from her belt. "How much for 2 boxes?" Vernon named his price, watching as she counted out the coins with quick, efficient movements. Her hands were calloused, he noticed, the hands of someone who worked hard and did not shy away from difficulty. When she looked up and caught him staring, he did not glance away. "Something else you need?" she asked, one eyebrow arching. "Just wondering what brings a woman alone into the Absaroka Range this late in the season." "My business." She gathered her ammunition and rifle. "Unless you are the territorial governor, in which case I apologize for my rudeness." "Not the governor, just curious." "Curious." She tested the word like it might be poisonous. "In my experience, when men say they are curious about a woman traveling alone, what they really mean is they think she is either stupid or running from something scandalous." Vernon crossed his arms over his broad chest, the muscles in his shoulders flexing beneath his worn cotton shirt. His dark hair, long enough to brush his collar, was tied back with a leather cord. "Or maybe they are just making conversation." "Are they?" Violet tilted her head. "So if a man walked in here alone, you would question his travel plans." He had to concede the point. "Fair enough. Thank you." She turned toward the door, then paused. "Though I suppose I should not be entirely antagonistic toward the only trading post within 40 miles. I am looking for a guide, someone who knows the northern passes well enough to get me to Kennewick before the first snow." Kennewick was a small mining settlement, another 2 weeks of hard riding into the mountains, assuming the weather held. Vernon knew those passes better than anyone living, having spent the last 8 years trapping and trading through every valley and ridge in this corner of Wyoming. But taking on a client meant closing his post and leaving his carefully ordered life behind for the better part of a month. "Kennewick is rough country," he said carefully. "Not much there except played-out silver claims and men with more whiskey than sense." "I am aware. My brother owns one of those played-out claims. He has not written in 6 months, and my mother is worried. Could be he just does not like writing letters. Could be." Violet's expression hardened. "Could also be he is dead in a ditch somewhere. Either way, I intend to find out." Vernon studied her for a long moment. Most people would have hired an escort in one of the larger towns, brought along a proper expedition. This woman planned to ride into some of the most unforgiving territory in the West to check on a brother who might not even be alive. It was either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish, and he had not quite decided which. I could take you, he heard himself say. $500, half now and half when we get there. 500, she laughed, sharp and disbelieving. For 2 weeks of riding. I could buy a horse for that. You could buy a horse, he agreed. But that horse would not know which paths to take when the terrain gets rough, or where to find water when the streams run dry, or how to avoid the crow hunting parties that pass through this area every few weeks. Crow hunting parties. She said it slowly, like she was testing whether he was lying. And how do I know you are not just trying to scare me into paying an inflated price? You do not, Vernon said honestly. But considering I have lived in these mountains for nearly a decade and still have my scalp, I would say my methods work. Violet drummed her fingers on the counter, clearly calculating whether the risk was worth the cost. Vernon found himself hoping she would agree, though he could not quite articulate why. Maybe it was the challenge in her eyes, or the way she refused to accept anything at face value. In a world where most people took what you said as gospel truth or called you a liar to your face, her constant questioning felt almost refreshing. 300, she countered, and you provide the supplies. 400 and we split the supplies. 350, you provide the supplies, and I will cook every night we are on the trail. Vernon considered this. His own cooking was functional at best, and the thought of something other than beans and hardtack held definite appeal. More than that, though, he was curious about this woman who negotiated like a railroad baron and carried herself like she had never heard the word fear. Deal, he said, extending his hand across the counter. Her grip was firm and warm, her palm pressing against his with confidence. Violet Cain Olson. And before you ask, the Cain is my mother's maiden name. She insisted I carry it. Vernon Drake, and I was not going to ask. Sure you were not. But she smiled this time, just slightly, and Vernon felt something shift in his chest. They spent the rest of the afternoon preparing for the journey. Vernon closed up his trading post, securing the valuable pelts and goods in a locked room at the back of the building. Violet proved to have her own horse, a sturdy bay mare named Rosie who had clearly seen her share of hard travel. She also had a pack mule, a surly creature named George who tried to bite Vernon the first time he came near. George does not like men, Violet explained, not sounding particularly apologetic. Smart mule, Vernon muttered, keeping his distance while they loaded supplies. As the sun began to set, painting the mountain peaks in shades of gold and crimson, Vernon found himself watching Violet move through the camp they had made near his post. She worked with the kind of efficiency that came from long practice, her movements economical and sure. When she caught him looking, she did not blush or simper like so many women might have. "Something on your mind, Drake?" she asked instead. "Just wondering how a woman learns to handle herself like you do, by necessity." She finished securing a pack to George's saddle. "My father died when I was 14, left my mother with 4 children and a farm that barely produced enough to feed us. I was the oldest, so I learned to hunt, to trade, to do whatever needed doing. 4 children. So you have other brothers besides the one in Kennewick?" 2 younger sisters and a brother. The girls are married now, settled with their own families. My youngest brother, Thomas, stayed to help my mother with the farm. She straightened, brushing dirt from her hands. Aaron, the brother in Kennewick, he was always the restless one. Heard about silver strikes and headed west 3 years ago. For a while he wrote regularly, then the letters stopped. Vernon heard the worry beneath her matter-of-fact tone. "What does your mother think happened? She thinks he found a woman and forgot about us. Or that he struck it rich and does not want to share, or that he is dead." Violet's jaw tightened. "Me, I do not know, but I intend to find out." "And what if you do not like what you find?" She met his eyes squarely. "Then at least we will know the truth." Not knowing is worse than any answer we might get. They set out at dawn the next morning, riding north into country that grew progressively wilder with each passing mile. The trading post had been isolated, but it was still connected to the world by rough roads and occasional travelers. The path Vernon led them down was little more than a game trail, winding through dense pine forests and across meadows thick with late summer wildflowers. Violet rode in silence for the first hour, her attention focused on the terrain around them. Vernon appreciated that she did not fill the quiet with meaningless chatter. Instead, she observed everything with those sharp green eyes, taking in details most people would have missed. "You said you have been in these mountains for 8 years," she said finally, her voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "What brought you out here?" "Fur trapping, originally," Vernon replied. "Came west from Missouri after the war." "The war?" She glanced at him sideways. "You would have been young. 16 when it started, 20 when it ended." He kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "Saw enough by then to want nothing to do with civilization for a while. So you came to the wilderness. Seemed like a good idea at the time. And now," she pressed. "Do you still think it was a good idea?" Vernon considered the question. Most people did not ask what he thought about his choices. They assumed that living alone in the mountains was either romantic or tragic, depending on their disposition, and never bothered to inquire further. "Most days," he said honestly, "the mountains do not lie to you. They are hard and they are dangerous, but they are honest. You know where you stand. Unlike people." "Unlike people," he agreed. They rode on, the trail climbing steadily into higher elevations. By midday, they had reached a ridge that offered a sweeping view of the valleys below. Vernon called a halt, and they dismounted to rest the horses and eat a cold lunch of dried meat and biscuits. Violet stood at the edge of the ridge, one hand shading her eyes as she looked out over the wilderness. "It is beautiful," she said quietly. "Harsh, but beautiful." Vernon joined her, close enough that he could smell the scent of sage and sunshine on her skin. "It can kill you if you are not careful. So can a lot of things." She turned to look at him, and he was struck again by the intelligence in her gaze. That does not make them any less worth experiencing. Philosophical for someone who questions everything. "Questioning things is how you find out what is true," she countered. "Taking things at face value is how you end up believing lies. Must be exhausting, though. Never accepting anything without proof. Must be dangerous," she shot back. "Accepting everything you are told without examination." Vernon found himself smiling despite himself. "You always have an answer ready. Usually. It comes from having 3 younger siblings. You learn to defend your position or get overrun." She smiled back, and Vernon felt that strange shift in his chest again, like something was settling into place. They made camp that evening beside a cold stream, the water so clear you could see every stone on the bottom. While Vernon tended to the horses, Violet set about making good on her promise to cook. She produced a small pot from her packs and soon had a fire going, with something that smelled considerably better than anything Vernon had made for himself in recent memory. "What is that?" he asked, drawn by the aroma. "Stew." "I dried some vegetables before I left home, and I bought salt pork at your post." She stirred the pot with a long wooden spoon. "It will not be fancy, but it will be hot and filling." When she served it up, Vernon discovered it was considerably better than she had implied. The meat was tender, the vegetables had softened perfectly, and she had somehow managed to season it in a way that made his usual cooking taste like wood shavings in comparison. "This is good," he said, scraping his bowl clean. "You sound surprised." "Not surprised, just impressed." Violet ladled him a second helping without being asked. "My mother taught me. She said a woman who could not feed her family was failing in her duty." "And you agree with that?" She paused, the spoon halfway to his bowl. Why would you ask? Because you question everything else men say. Figured you might question what women say too. I do. She finished serving him and sat back. I think my mother was wrong, actually. Feeding your family is important, but it is not just a woman's duty. My father was an excellent cook, better than my mother if we are being honest. But she said it like feeding people was the measure of a woman's worth, and that always bothered me. What do you think measures a person's worth? Violet was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. I think it is about how you treat people who cannot do anything for you. Whether you are kind when kindness costs you something, whether you tell the truth even when a lie would be easier. She looked up at him. What do you think? Vernon had not expected the question to be turned back on him. He chewed slowly, considering his answer. I think worth is about whether you leave the world better than you found it, even if it is just a small corner of the world and even if the improvement is tiny. That is a good answer, Violet said softly. Better than I expected. You expected a bad answer. I expected a simple answer. Something about strength or providing or protecting. That is what most men seem to think defines them. Those things matter, Vernon said, but they are not everything. No, Violet agreed. They are not. The fire crackled between them, sending sparks up into the darkening sky. Overhead, stars were beginning to appear, more than Vernon had ever seen growing up in Missouri. Out here, away from towns and lanterns, the night sky was a vast tapestry of light. Tell me about your brother, Vernon said after a while. The one we are looking for. Violet drew her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. Aaron is 25, 3 years older than me. When we were children, he was the one who taught me to shoot. He was patient about it too, even when I kept missing. Sounds like a good brother. He was. Is. She corrected herself quickly. He used to say that the world was too big to spend your whole life in one place, that there was so much to see and do, and staying on the farm felt like being buried alive. But you stayed. Someone had to. My mother needed help and my younger siblings were too little. Aaron left as soon as he turned 21, sent money back when he could, wrote letters telling us about the places he had been. Denver, Salt Lake City, Virginia City. He worked odd jobs, saved what he could, and then he heard about Kennewick. And you have not heard from him in 6 months. Not a word. Violet's voice went tight. Which is why I have to know what happened, because either something is wrong or he has decided we are not worth remembering. And I need to know which. Vernon heard the pain beneath her words. You think he forgot about you? I think it is possible. She rested her chin on her knees. People change when they go west. They leave behind who they were and become someone new. Maybe Aaron became someone who does not have a family back home. Or maybe he is in trouble and cannot write. Maybe. But she did not sound convinced. Vernon wanted to offer her comfort, to promise that they would find her brother alive and well. But he had learned long ago that false comfort was worse than none at all. So instead, he said, whatever we find, at least you will know. Yes, Violet said quietly. At least there is that. They traveled for 3 more days, following paths that took them deeper into the mountains. The terrain grew rougher, the trees thicker, and the air colder as they climbed. Vernon found himself watching Violet more than he watched the trail, impressed despite himself at how well she handled the difficult journey. She never complained about the long hours in the saddle or the cold nights sleeping on hard ground. When her horse threw a shoe, she dismounted and helped him replace it without being asked. On the 4th evening, they made camp in a small valley protected on 3 sides by steep rock walls. A waterfall tumbled down the northern face, creating a deep pool that was ice cold even in late summer. While Violet prepared dinner, Vernon scouted the perimeter, checking for signs of other travelers or potential dangers. When he returned, he found her kneeling by the pool, washing her face and hands in the frigid water. Her braid had come partially undone, and strands of auburn hair caught the fading sunlight like copper wire. "Find anything?" she asked without turning around. "Old fire pit about 100 yards east, maybe 2 weeks old. Single traveler from the look of it. Dangerous, hard to say, could have been a trapper, could have been someone running from the law." Vernon crouched beside her. "We will keep watches tonight. I will take first, you take second." "I can take first," she offered. "I am sure you can. But I am also sure I have had more practice staying awake through the night, and the first watch is the hardest." Violet turned to look at him, water dripping from her chin. "Why? Why what? Why is the first watch hardest?" Vernon sat back on his heels. "Because you have not had time to rest yet. Your body is already tired from the day, and you have to push through that fatigue to stay alert. Second watch, you have at least had a few hours of sleep to take the edge off." "Huh." She wiped her face with her sleeve. "That makes sense. All right, you take first watch, but wake me if anything happens." "I will." They ate dinner as the last light faded from the sky. Violet had made something she called Johnny cakes, flat cornmeal cakes cooked on a flat stone by the fire. Served with honey and a bit of the remaining salt pork, they were simple but satisfying. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" Vernon asked, licking honey from his fingers. "Trial and error, mostly. My mother taught me the basics, but a lot of it came from experimenting." She handed him another cake. "The first time I made Johnny cakes, they came out hard as rocks. My brother Thomas tried to eat one and nearly broke a tooth." Vernon laughed, the sound surprising him. He could not remember the last time something had genuinely amused him. "What did you do?" "Tried again, and again, and again until I figured out the right proportions." She smiled at the memory. "Thomas said I was stubborn, I said I was determined, our mother said we were both right. Your mother sounds wise. She is. Practical too. When my father died, everyone expected her to sell the farm and move in with her sister in Illinois. Instead, she kept it running, taught us how to survive without depending on anyone else." "Is that where you learned to question everything?" Vernon asked. From her, Violet considered this. "Partly. But I think it also came from watching what happened when people did not question things. Our neighbors, the Hendersons, they took a loan from a bank based on promises the banker made. Never read the contract, just trusted that the terms were fair. 2 years later, they lost everything when the bank called in the loan early. And your mother taught you to read the contract. My mother taught me that trust without verification is just another word for foolishness." Violet poked at the fire with a stick, sending up a shower of sparks. "She said men especially will say anything to get what they want, and a woman who believes every word out of a man's mouth will find herself in trouble sooner or later. That is a hard view of men." "Is it wrong, though?" Violet looked at him directly. "How many men have you known who told the truth when a lie was more convenient?" Vernon thought about his years in the war, the promises made by officers who sent boys to die for causes they barely understood. He thought about traders who cheated trappers out of fair prices for their furs, and miners who jumped claims they knew belonged to others. "Not many," he admitted. "Exactly." Violet pulled her knees up again, a gesture Vernon was beginning to recognize as something she did when she was thinking hard about something. "So I question things. I verify. I do not take statements at face value just because someone delivers them with confidence." "Must make it hard to trust anyone." "It does," she said quietly. "But it also keeps me from getting hurt, or at least, it keeps me from being surprised when I do get hurt." Vernon wanted to tell her that not everyone was untrustworthy, that some people meant what they said. But he realized he would be asking her to take his word for it, which would rather prove her point. So instead, he said, "I am going to start my watch. You should get some sleep." Violet looked like she wanted to say something more, but she just nodded and retreated to her bedroll on the far side of the fire. Vernon watched her settle in, wrapping herself in blankets against the mountain cold. Within minutes, her breathing had evened out into the steady rhythm of sleep. Vernon stood and moved to the edge of the firelight, positioning himself where he could watch both the approach to the camp and the sleeping woman behind him. The night was clear and cold, the stars so bright they cast faint shadows. An owl hooted somewhere in the darkness, and the waterfall provided a constant backdrop of white noise. He found his thoughts returning to Violet's words. She questioned everything, trusted nothing, and seemed to expect disappointment from the world. It was a lonely way to live, Vernon thought, always waiting for people to prove themselves unworthy. But he could not entirely disagree with her reasoning. The world had a way of crushing people who were too trusting, too willing to believe the best of others. Still, there was something almost sad about it. To never take anything on faith, to always be looking for the catch or the lie. It spoke to someone who had been disappointed too many times, who had learned through bitter experience that people could not be relied upon. Vernon wondered who had taught her that lesson. Her father's death, certainly, had shown her that the world was not fair. But there was something more personal in the way she spoke about men specifically, something that suggested a deeper wound than just general cynicism. The hours passed slowly. Vernon moved in a circuit around the camp, checking sight lines and listening for sounds that did not belong. Once, he heard something large moving through the brush to the east, but it passed without coming closer. Probably an elk or a bear, giving their camp a wide berth. When his watch was half over, Vernon returned to the fire and added more wood. The movement woke Violet and she sat up, instantly alert. "Everything all right?" she asked softly. "Fine. Go back to sleep." But she stood and came to join him by the fire. "Cannot sleep anymore. Might as well start my watch early." Vernon was tired enough not to argue. He showed her the circuit he had been walking, pointed out the areas that needed the most attention, and then retreated to his own bedroll. As he drifted off, his last conscious thought was that he felt strangely safe knowing Violet was the one keeping watch. He woke to the smell of coffee and the gray light of pre-dawn. Violet had already packed up most of the camp and was heating water for breakfast. When she saw him stirring, she poured coffee into a tin cup and brought it over. "Sleep well?" she asked. Vernon accepted the coffee gratefully. "Better than expected. Any trouble during your watch?" "Nothing. Quiet as a church." She handed him a plate with more Jonna cakes and some reheated salt pork. "We should make good time today if the weather holds." They were back on the trail within the hour, climbing steadily into higher country. The trees began to thin out, replaced by rocky meadows and patches of snow that lingered in the shadows even in late summer. The air grew noticeably colder, and Violet pulled a woolen shawl from her pack to wrap around her shoulders. Around midday, they crested a ridge and Vernon pulled his horse to a stop. Below them, a rough trail wound down into a narrow valley. At the far end, barely visible in the distance, was a collection of wooden buildings that might generously be called a town. "Kennewick," Vernon said, pointing. Violet stood in her stirrups, straining to see. "That is it. That is where Aaron has been for 3 years. That is it. Population maybe 200 on a good day, half that when the mining is slow. It looks like a strong wind could knock it over." "Probably could," Vernon agreed. "Most of these mining camps do not last long. They spring up when someone finds color and they disappear when the ore runs out. And my brother wanted to come here." Violet sat back down, her expression unreadable. "I will never understand it." Maybe he liked the possibility. The chance that he might strike it rich. Or maybe he just wanted to get as far from home as possible. Vernon heard the hurt in her voice. "We will find out soon enough. We can make it down there by nightfall if we push." But Violet was not listening. Her attention had been caught by something on the trail below them, and her hand had gone to the rifle at her saddle. Vernon followed her gaze and felt his own muscles tense. 3 men were riding up the trail toward them. Even at a distance, Vernon could see they were rough-looking characters, the kind who made their living on the edges of the law. They rode with the easy confidence of men who were used to taking what they wanted. "Friends of yours?" Violet asked quietly. "No, stay behind me. I can handle myself." "I know you can, but let me do the talking first." Violet looked like she wanted to argue, but she gave a short nod. Vernon appreciated that she understood the value of presenting a united front. Out here, showing division or weakness could get you killed. The 3 men drew closer, and Vernon's hand drifted casually to rest on the revolver at his hip. Not threatening, just ready. The lead rider was a heavy-set man with a thick beard and eyes that assessed them with calculated interest. His companions were younger, leaner, and had the hungry look of men who had not eaten well in a while. "Afternoon," the bearded man said, reining in about 10 feet away. His eyes moved from Vernon to Violet and back again. "You folks heading to Kennewick?" "Maybe," Vernon said. "You coming from there?" "Might be." The man smiled, showing tobacco-stained teeth. "Nice country up here, easy to get lost if you do not know the trails." "We know the trails." "I am sure you do." The man's gaze slid to Violet again. "Your wife," Vernon felt Violet stiffen behind him. Before he could answer, she spoke up. "Why do you want to know?" The man's smile widened. "Just making conversation, madam, friendly-like." "That does not answer my question," Violet said. "Why does my relationship to this man matter to you?" "Violet," Vernon said quietly, a warning in his tone. But she ignored him. "Because it seems to me that you are either trying to figure out if I am unprotected, or you are judging whether I am worth the trouble of causing problems. Either way, the answer is yes, I am protected, and no, I am not worth the trouble." The bearded man's smile had frozen in place. His companions had shifted in their saddles, hands moving toward weapons. Vernon felt the situation balanced on a knife's edge, ready to tip into violence. "The lady has a sharp tongue," the bearded man said slowly. "The lady has eyes and a brain," Violet countered. "And she knows when she is being sized up like a prize at a county fair." "Violet," Vernon said again, more urgently this time. The bearded man's hand had moved to his gun belt. "Maybe the lady needs to learn some manners. Maybe the lady needs to be addressed directly instead of being talked about like she is not here," Violet shot back. Vernon moved his horse forward, placing himself more firmly between Violet and the 3 men. "We are just passing through. No trouble intended, none wanted." For a long moment, nobody moved. The bearded man stared at Vernon, clearly weighing his options. Vernon stared back, his body relaxed but ready. He had killed men before, during the war and once or twice since, and he would do it again if necessary. But he hoped it would not come to that. Finally, the bearded man laughed, a harsh bark of sound. "No trouble then, just making conversation." He tipped his hat mockingly to Violet. "Enjoy Kennewick, madam. It is a real welcoming place." He spurred his horse forward, and his companions followed. They passed within a few feet of Vernon and Violet, close enough that Vernon could smell the whiskey and sweat on them. Then they were past, riding up the trail toward the ridge. Vernon waited until they were out of sight before he turned to Violet. "What in the hell was that?" "That was me not being intimidated by men who think a woman alone is easy prey." "That was you almost getting us killed." Violet's eyes flashed. "Those men were sizing us up from the moment they saw us. Better to let them know I am not afraid than to cower and hope they leave us alone." There is a difference between showing courage and being reckless. Is there? Because it looked to me like they were going to cause trouble no matter what I said. At least this way, they know I will fight back. Vernon took a deep breath, forcing down his anger. They know you will talk back. That is not the same as being able to fight back. You think I cannot fight? I think you are smart and capable and good with a rifle, Vernon said. I also think there were 3 of them and 2 of us, and if it had come to a gunfight, someone would have died. Maybe them, maybe us, probably some of both. Was your pride worth that risk? Violet opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. For the first time since he had met her, she looked uncertain. I am tired of men thinking they can say whatever they want to me because I am a woman. I am tired of being treated like property or a prize or something to be evaluated. I understand that, Vernon said more gently. But out here, pride can get you killed. Sometimes the smart thing is to let men think what they want and save your fight for when it matters. And you get to decide when it matters. No, but maybe we decide together instead of you making decisions that affect both of us without warning. Violet was quiet for a long moment. You are right, she said finally. I should have let you handle it. I am sorry. Vernon was surprised by the apology. You do not apologize much, do you? Only when I am wrong. She met his eyes. But I was wrong. Those men could have hurt both of us, and I let my temper get in the way of common sense. Your temper, or your need to question everything men say. A small smile tugged at her lips. Maybe both. They rode on in silence for a while, descending the trail toward Kennewick. Vernon found himself thinking about what she had said, about being tired of how men treated her. He supposed it must be exhausting, always having to prove yourself, always having to defend your right to be taken seriously. For what it is worth, he said after a while, I do not think of you as property or a prize. What do you think of me as? Vernon considered his answer carefully. As someone who makes me think harder than I have in years. Violet turned to look at him, surprise clear on her face. What do you mean? I mean you question everything. You do not let me get away with easy answers or assumptions. You push back when I say something that does not make sense. He shifted in his saddle. It is annoying sometimes, but it is also good. It makes me examine what I believe and why I believe it. Most men hate that about me. I am not most men. No, Violet said softly. I am starting to realize you are not. They reached Kennewick just as the sun was setting, painting the ramshackle buildings in shades of gold and orange that made them look almost picturesque. Up close, however, the town was exactly as rough as Vernon had described. The main street was a muddy strip lined with saloons, a general store, a livery, and a few other businesses Vernon could not quite identify. Men loitered in doorways and on porches, watching them ride in with the kind of bored interest that came from having nothing better to do. Vernon led them to the livery, where a grizzled old man with one eye took their horses and mule for 50 cents a night. You want stalls or just the corral? He asked. Stalls, Vernon said, paying extra. Their animals had worked hard on the journey and deserved a roof over their heads. Looking for someone, Violet said to the old man. Aaron Olson, you know him. The old man squinted at her with his good eye. Olson, big fellow, talks too much. That is Aaron, Violet said, hope lighting her face. Is he here? Was here. Has not seen him in a couple weeks, though. Might be out at his claim. Where is his claim? The old man pointed vaguely north. Up Bitter Creek, maybe 5 miles. Yellow tent if he has not moved it. Violet pressed a coin into his hand. Thank you. They left the livery and walked down the main street looking for somewhere to stay. Most of the buildings were saloons or gambling houses, places that rented rooms by the hour for purposes Vernon did not want to think about with Violet standing next to him. Finally, They found a boarding house run by a thin woman named Mrs. Patterson who looked them over with shrewd eyes. 2 rooms, Vernon said. Got 1 room with 2 beds, Mrs. Patterson countered. Take it or leave it. Vernon glanced at Violet, who shrugged. We will take it. The room was small and sparsely furnished, with 2 narrow beds separated by a washstand and a single window that overlooked the muddy street. It was not luxurious, but it was clean, and after a week of sleeping on the ground, even a thin mattress felt like heaven. I am going to ask around about your brother, Vernon said, setting his pack on one of the beds. See if anyone knows more than the stable man did. I am coming with you, Violet said immediately. It would be safer if you stayed here. Safer for who, you or me? She crossed her arms. We are partners in this, Drake. You said so yourself when you agreed to guide me. That means I get to be involved in finding my brother. Vernon wanted to argue, but he recognized the stubborn set of her jaw. Fine, but stay close and let me do most of the talking. I can agree to the first part. They spent the next 2 hours visiting the various establishments in Kennewick, asking about Aaron Olson. Most people remembered him, a tall man with sandy hair who talked about striking it rich and bought drinks when he had money. But nobody had seen him recently, and the stories about him were contradictory. Some said he had hit a good vein and was working it hard. Others said his claim was played out and he was surviving on credit and hope. Finally, in the 4th saloon they visited, a grizzled prospector named Dutch gave them information that sounded more substantial. Aaron Olson. Sure, I know him. Good man, bit naive about mining, but his heart is in the right place. Dutch took a long pull from his beer. Last I heard, he was having trouble with some claim jumpers. 3 men trying to say his claim was not properly filed and they had a right to it. Vernon felt Violet go still beside him. 3 men, he asked. One of them heavy-set with a thick beard. Dutch looked surprised. That is them. Gideon Carter and his boys. Nasty pieces of work, the lot of them. They have been working this area for the last year, filing false claims and pushing out the original prospectors. We saw them on the trail, Vernon said grimly. They were coming from the direction of Bitter Creek. Violet had gone pale. We need to go to Aaron's claim, now. It is almost dark, Vernon said. We would be riding blind. I do not care. If those men were at his claim, if they hurt him. She did not finish the sentence. Vernon understood her fear, but he also understood the risk of traveling unknown trails in the dark. First light, he said firmly. We will leave at first light. If we try to go now, we could miss the trail or we could ride right into an ambush. Your brother has waited this long. A few more hours will not make a difference. You do not know that. No, I do not. But I do know that we cannot help him if we are dead. Vernon put a hand on her shoulder. First light, I promise. Violet looked like she wanted to argue, but she finally nodded. First light. They returned to the boarding house in silence. Violet sat on her bed, staring at the wall while Vernon cleaned his weapons and checked their supplies. He could feel her anxiety like a physical presence in the room, thick and choking. He is probably fine, Vernon said after a while. Dutch said those men were causing trouble, but that does not mean they have done anything to Aaron. You do not believe that any more than I do. Violet's voice was flat. Those men on the trail, they had that look, the look of men who have done something they do not want discovered. Vernon could not argue with that. He had seen the same look during the war on the faces of soldiers after a particularly brutal engagement. It was the look of people carrying fresh blood on their hands. Get some sleep, he said quietly. We will leave as soon as it is light enough to see the trail. I do not think I can sleep. Try anyway. You will need your strength tomorrow. Violet lay down on her bed, fully clothed, her rifle within arm's reach. Vernon did the same, though he left his boots on. He did not expect trouble during the night, but in a town like Kennewick, it was better to be prepared. He must have dozed off, because he woke to find pale gray light filtering through the window. Violet was already awake, sitting on the edge of her bed with her pack ready. "Time to go," she said. They left Kennewick as the town was just beginning to stir, riding north toward Bitter Creek. Vernon pushed their horses harder than he normally would, aware of Violet's urgency and sharing more of it than he cared to admit. Something about the encounter with Carter and his men had left him uneasy, a sense that they had stumbled into something dangerous. The trail to Bitter Creek was rough and poorly maintained, winding through dense forest and across rocky slopes. After about an hour they reached the creek itself, a swift-running stream that carved its way through a narrow valley. Vernon saw evidence of mining activity, sluice boxes, piles of tailings, and a few scattered tents. "There," Violet said, pointing. About 100 yards upstream, a yellow tent stood in a small clearing. Even from a distance, Vernon could see that something was wrong. The tent's entrance flap hung open, moving slightly in the morning breeze, and several items were scattered on the ground nearby. They dismounted and approached cautiously, Vernon with his hand on his revolver. As they drew closer, the signs of violence became unmistakable. The tent had been partially torn down, its contents strewn about as if someone had been searching for something. Tools lay broken and scattered, and a sluice box had been smashed to pieces. But there was no sign of Aaron Olson. Violet moved through the wreckage slowly, picking up items and setting them down again. A dented tin cup, a book with water-damaged pages, a shirt with one sleeve torn off. "Aaron," she called out, her voice echoing off the rocky walls of the valley. "Aaron, are you here?" No answer came. Vernon circled the perimeter of the camp, looking for tracks. He found plenty. Boot prints from at least 3 different men, evidence of a struggle near the tent, and a trail of disturbed earth leading away from the camp toward the tree line. "Violet," he called quietly. She came to join him, following his gaze to the tracks. Together, they followed the trail into the trees. It led about 50 yards before ending at a shallow depression in the ground, recently disturbed. Vernon knelt and began to carefully remove the dirt and leaves. Violet watched, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. After only a few minutes of digging, Vernon uncovered fabric, a shirt sleeve. "No," Violet whispered. Vernon continued digging, moving faster now. The shirt was attached to an arm, the arm to a shoulder, and finally he uncovered a face. A man's face, pale and still, with sandy hair matted with dried blood. Aaron Olson. Violet made a sound that was half sob, half scream, and dropped to her knees beside the shallow grave. Vernon checked for a pulse, knowing already that he would not find one. The body was cold, the blood long dried. Aaron had been dead for at least a day, maybe 2. "He is gone," Vernon said gently. "I am sorry." Violet reached out with trembling hands, brushing dirt from her brother's face. "They killed him. Those men we saw on the trail, they killed him." Vernon sat back on his heels, anger burning hot in his chest. He had seen plenty of death, had dealt it himself when necessary, but this was different. This was murder for profit, 3 men killing one because he stood between them and what they wanted. "We need to get the sheriff," he said. "Sheriff?" Violet laughed, a broken sound. "You think there is law in Kennewick that matters? Dutch said those men have been doing this for a year. If the sheriff cared, they would be in jail already." She was probably right, but Vernon had to try. "We have to report it. Get your brother buried properly, at least." Violet stood, and Vernon saw something change in her expression. The grief was still there, sharp and cutting, but it had been joined by something else, something cold and hard and implacable. "We are going to kill them," she said. "Violet, no." They murdered my brother. Her voice was steady now, flat and certain. They beat him, they shot him, and they buried him like he was nothing, like he did not matter, like he did not have a mother and sisters and a brother who loved him. I know, but revenge is not justice. Then what is? Reporting it to a sheriff who will do nothing. Watching them walk free while Aaron lies in the ground. She shook her head. No, we are going to find them and we are going to make them pay. Vernon stood and gripped her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. Listen to me. I understand what you are feeling, but if we go after them for revenge, we are not any better than they are. I do not care about being better than them, Violet said fiercely. I care about my brother getting justice. This is not justice. This is vengeance. Then call it vengeance. Call it whatever you want. I am still going to do it. Vernon saw the determination in her eyes and knew that no argument would change her mind. She had come all this way to find her brother, and now she had found him dead. The grief and rage she must be feeling would not be satisfied with legal processes that might lead nowhere. All right, he said quietly. We will go after them, but we do it my way. We do not just ride in shooting. We find them, we get proof they did this, and then we make them answer for it. Proof? You want proof? My brother is dead and those men were coming from his claim. That is not proof. That is suspicion. If we are going to do this, we need to be certain. Vernon gentled his voice. Trust me, Violet, I want them to pay as much as you do, but we have to be smart about it. Violet stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Fine. We do it your way. But if your way does not work, we do it mine. Agreed. They spent the next hour carefully covering Aaron's body again and marking the spot so they could find it later. Vernon would have preferred to bring the body back to Kennewick, but without a wagon or travois, it was not practical. Better to leave him where he was and come back with proper transportation. As they worked, Violet told Vernon stories about her brother. How he had taught her to skip stones across the creek near their farm. How he always saved the last bite of his dinner for their dog. How he had cried when their father died, even though he was nearly grown, and tried to be strong for everyone else. Vernon listened, understanding that she needed to talk, needed to remember Aaron as he had been rather than as he was now. When they finally rode back toward Kennewick, Violet was quiet again, but it was a different kind of silence. Not the silence of uncertainty or fear, but the silence of someone who had made a decision and was gathering strength to see it through. In Kennewick, they went straight to the sheriff's office. The sheriff was a balding man named Hawkins who listened to their story with an expression of polite skepticism. Carter and his boys, huh? He leaned back in his chair. You got proof they did this. We found Aaron Olson dead at his claim, Vernon said. We saw Carter coming from that direction yesterday. Coming from that direction is not proof of murder. Hawkins scratched his chin. Could have been anyone, could have been a mining accident. He was beaten and shot, Violet said, her voice tight. That is not an accident. Maybe. Or maybe it was a claim dispute that went wrong. Happens all the time in mining country. Hawkins spread his hands. Look, I am sorry about your brother, miss, but unless you have witnesses or clear evidence, there is not much I can do. You could question Carter, Vernon said. On what grounds? Riding on a public trail, Hawkins shook his head. Carter has friends in this town, important friends. I start accusing him without proof, it will be my job on the line. Vernon felt disgust rise in his throat. So you are going to do nothing? I am going to investigate, Hawkins said stiffly. But I need something to go on. You bring me evidence, I will act on it. Until then, my hands are tied. Outside the sheriff's office, Violet turned to Vernon. I told you, no law here that matters. Then we find the evidence ourselves, Vernon said. We track down Carter and his men and we get them to confess. How? By being smarter than they are. Vernon started walking back toward the boarding house. They think they got away with it. That makes them confident. Confident men make mistakes. Over the next 2 days, Vernon and Violet quietly gathered information about Gideon Carter and his associates. They learned that the 3 men had been operating in the Kennewick area for over a year, targeting small-time prospectors who worked alone. The pattern was always the same. Carter would file a counterclaim, arguing that the original claim was improperly filed or that he had prior rights to the land. While the legal dispute was ongoing, the original prospector would often disappear or suddenly decide to sell their claim for far less than it was worth. "How many?" Violet asked Dutch one evening in the saloon. "How many men have they done this to?" Dutch counted on his fingers. "At least 6 that I know of, maybe more. Most of them just take whatever money Carter offers and leave town. Easier than fighting. And the ones who do not take the money," Dutch looked uncomfortable. "They tend to have accidents, or they just disappear." Vernon and Violet exchanged glances. "And nobody does anything. What can we do? Carter has money, and money talks in a place like this. Sheriff is not going to cross him, and most folks here are just trying to survive. Nobody wants to be the next one to have an accident." That evening, Vernon and Violet sat in their room planning their next move. Vernon had spread a rough map of the area on the floor, marking the locations of various claims and the places where prospectors had disappeared. "There is a pattern," he said, tracing lines with his finger. "Carter targets claims that are isolated and that show promise of actually having valuable ore. Your brother's claim on Bitter Creek fits both criteria." "So we know why they killed him," Violet said, "but we still need proof. We need a confession." Vernon sat back. "And I think I know how to get one." His plan was simple but risky. Vernon would approach Carter and claim to have a valuable claim he wanted to sell. He would make it clear that he knew about Carter's methods and was willing to participate if the price was right. The idea was to draw Carter into discussing his other acquisitions, including Aaron's claim, while Violet listened from hiding. "It is too dangerous," Violet objected. "If they realize what you are doing, they will kill you. They can try." Vernon checked his revolver. "But I have one advantage. They think they have gotten away with murder. That makes them careless, or it makes them paranoid and trigger-happy." "Maybe. But it is the best chance we have." Vernon looked at her seriously. "Unless you have a better idea." Violet was quiet for a long moment. "I could do it. I could be the one who approaches them." "No." "Why not? They do not know I am Aaron's sister. I could say I am a prospector's widow looking to sell my late husband's claim." "Because they have already seen you," Vernon reminded her. "On the trail, remember. They might recognize you. It was getting dark. We were far away. And I will wear different clothes, do my hair differently." Violet's expression was determined. "Vernon, this makes more sense. A woman desperate for money is less threatening than a man who claims to know about their operation." Vernon hated to admit it, but she had a point. Carter would be more likely to let his guard down around a woman, especially one he thought was desperate and vulnerable. It played into all the assumptions men like him made about women being weak and easily manipulated. "I do not like it," he said finally. "I did not ask if you liked it. I asked if it made sense. It does, but that does not mean I have to like it." Vernon ran a hand through his hair. "If we do this, you are not going alone. I will be close by, and at the first sign of trouble, I am coming in." "Fine. But you let me handle the conversation. No rushing in just because they say something that offends your sense of honor." Vernon had to smile despite himself. "You know me that well already, I am learning." Violet's expression softened slightly. "You are a good man, Vernon Drake. Better than most. But you have a protective streak that could get both of us killed if you are not careful." "I will be careful." They spent the rest of the evening working out the details. Violet would approach Carter at his usual table in the Silver Dollar Saloon. She would tell him she was Sarah Miller, widow of a prospector who had died in a cave 3 months earlier. She had been trying to work the claim herself, but it was too much for her, and she needed to sell. She had heard that Carter was interested in acquiring claims and was willing to pay fair prices. The story was believable enough, and it gave her a reason to seem desperate without appearing suspicious. Vernon would position himself in the saloon where he could hear the conversation without being obvious. If anything went wrong, he would be close enough to intervene. The next evening, they put the plan into action. Violet had transformed herself, wearing a shabby dress borrowed from Mrs. Patterson and pulling her hair back in a tight, plain bun. The effect was remarkable. Instead of the confident, sharp-eyed woman Vernon had come to know, she looked worn down and weary, a woman at the end of her resources. "You look terrible," Vernon said with approval. "Thank you, I think." Violet checked her appearance one more time in the small mirror. "How do I sound?" She put on a trembling, uncertain voice. "I need to sell my claim, Mr. Carter. I just cannot manage it on my own." "Perfect. You sound desperate without being pathetic." "Good." Violet's real voice returned, hard and determined. "Remember, you do not come in unless I signal or there is real danger. I need him to talk, and he will not do that if he feels threatened." Vernon did not like it, but he nodded. They left the boarding house separately, Vernon going first to take up his position in the saloon. He found a spot at the bar where he could watch Carter's usual table in the mirror behind the bottles. When Violet entered 15 minutes later, Vernon had to admire her transformation again. She moved differently, hesitantly, like every eye in the room was a potential threat. She went straight to Carter's table, where the big man was drinking with his 2 companions. Vernon could not hear what she said initially, but he saw Carter look her over with interest, then gesture for her to sit. From his position at the bar, Vernon strained to hear their conversation over the noise of the saloon. Carter was speaking, his voice carrying just enough for Vernon to catch most of the words. "A widow, you say? That is a hard thing, losing a husband." "Yes, sir." Violet's voice was small and uncertain, nothing like her normal sharp tone. "I have been trying to keep the claim going, but it is too much work for me alone." "Where is this claim located?" Carter asked. "Up past Willow Creek, about 3 miles northwest of here. My husband said it had good color, but I do not know enough about mining to work it properly." Carter exchanged glances with his men. "Willow Creek, I know that area, not many claims up there." "No, sir, it is pretty isolated. That is part of why I am having trouble. There is nobody nearby to help if something goes wrong." "Isolated can be good," Carter said slowly. "Means nobody bothering you, asking questions." He leaned back in his chair. "How much are you asking?" "I do not rightly know what it is worth," Violet said. "I was hoping you might come look at it and make me a fair offer." "Fair," Carter smiled. "I always try to be fair with widows and the like. Had to make several fair offers recently, as it happens." "Really?" Violet leaned forward slightly. "To other people in situations like mine, more or less. There was one fellow, big talker, thought he had struck it rich up on Bitter Creek. Turned out his claim was not as good as he thought." Carter took a drink. "Eventually he saw reason and sold it to me." Vernon's hand tightened on his beer glass. "This was it," Carter talking about Aaron. "Did he go back east?" Violet asked, her voice still timid. "The man from Bitter Creek, who knows? Who cares?" Carter waved a dismissive hand. "Point is, the claim is mine now, properly and legally. That is how business works out here, Mrs. Miller. The strong survive and the weak fall aside." "That is a harsh view, Mr. Carter." "It is an honest one." Carter leaned forward. "You seem like a smart woman. Smart enough to know when you are beaten. smart enough to take what you can get and move on with your life. And if I am not smart enough? The question came out before Violet could stop it, an edge of challenge creeping into her voice. Carter's expression hardened. Then you end up like that fool on Bitter Creek, too stubborn to see reason, too proud to take a good offer. He paused. You do not want to end up like him, Mrs. Miller. What happened to him? Let us just say he had an accident. Carter smiled, cold and cruel. Mining is dangerous work. Accidents happen all the time. Vernon saw Violet's shoulders tense and knew she was barely controlling her anger. He shifted slightly, ready to move if necessary. But Violet held herself together, her voice still small and frightened when she spoke. I see. So if I do not sell to you, I might have an accident too. I did not say that, Mrs. Miller. But it is worth considering that claims get jumped all the time out here. Papers get lost, boundaries get disputed, and if you are not here to defend your rights. Carter spread his hands. Well, possession is 9/10 of the law, as they say. That is not law, Violet said quietly. That is theft. Carter's expression went cold. You watch your mouth, woman. I have been patient with you, but my patience has limits. I am sure it does. Violet stood up, and Vernon saw her hand move toward her belt, where she had hidden a small pistol. Just like your patience ran out with Aaron Olson on Bitter Creek. Carter's eyes widened in recognition, and his hand went to his gun. But Vernon was already moving, crossing the saloon in 3 long strides. He grabbed Carter's wrist before the man could draw, twisting hard enough to make him gasp. I would not do that, Vernon said quietly. Carter's 2 companions started to rise, but found themselves facing Violet's pistol and Vernon's revolver, which he had drawn with his free hand. Sit down, Violet said, her voice no longer timid at all. And keep your hands where we can see them. The saloon had gone quiet, all eyes on the confrontation. Dutch was standing near the door, and Vernon saw the old prospector nod slightly, as if approving of what was happening. You cannot prove anything, Carter said, though fear had crept into his voice. Whatever you think I did, you have no proof. We have your confession, Violet said. You just admitted to killing Aaron Olson. Everyone in this saloon heard you. I did not admit to killing anyone. I said he had an accident. You said he was too stubborn and too proud, and that we did not want to end up like him, Vernon said. Combined with the fact that his body is buried on his own claim, beaten and shot, that is enough to hang you. Sheriff will not touch me, Carter blustered. I have friends. Maybe, Vernon said. But I am betting the people in this saloon are tired of watching you steal claims and kill men who stand up to you. I am betting if it came to a choice between you and justice, they would choose justice. He looked around the room as he spoke, meeting the eyes of the miners and prospectors who had gathered. He saw anger there and resentment, and a hunger for someone to finally stand up to Carter and his men. What do you say? Vernon called out to the room. Are we going to let this man keep murdering people, or are we going to do something about it? For a moment, nobody moved. Then Dutch stood up. I say we take them to the sheriff, make him do his job for once. Another man stood, then another. Within moments, half the saloon was on its feet, and Carter was surrounded by angry miners who had lost friends or been threatened themselves. You are making a mistake, Carter said, but his voice had lost its confidence. The only mistake was letting you get away with it for so long, Dutch said. He looked at Vernon and Violet. We will take it from here. You two have done enough. Vernon released Carter's wrist and stepped back, keeping his gun drawn until he was sure the situation was under control. The miners pulled Carter and his men to their feet and marched them toward the door. As they passed, Carter looked at Violet with pure hatred. You lied to me, he said. I asked questions, Violet corrected. And you answered them. That is not lying. That is you being stupid enough to confess to murder because you thought I was weak." Carter spat at her feet, but the miners dragged him away before he could say anything else. When they were gone, the saloon erupted in conversation, everyone talking at once about what had just happened. Vernon holstered his gun and turned to Violet. "You all right?" "I will be." She was shaking slightly, the adrenaline wearing off. "Did we really just do that?" "We did." "And do you think they will actually hang him?" "I think once Sheriff Hawkins sees how the wind is blowing, he will not have much choice." Vernon put a hand on her shoulder. "You got justice for your brother." Violet nodded, but her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Justice? But he is still dead." "I know." Vernon pulled her into a careful embrace, and after a moment she leaned into him, finally allowing herself to grieve. They stood like that for a long time, while the noise of the saloon swirled around them and the world slowly returned to normal. The trial of Gideon Carter and his associates took place 2 weeks later in a makeshift courtroom above the general store. A circuit judge happened to be in the area, and under pressure from the miners and residents of Kennewick, Sheriff Hawkins had no choice but to proceed with a proper legal process. Vernon and Violet testified about finding Aaron's body and about Carter's confession in the saloon. A dozen other witnesses corroborated their story, and several came forward with tales of Carter's other crimes. The evidence was overwhelming. The judge, a stern man named Blackwell, took less than an hour to reach a verdict: guilty of murder in the first degree. Sentencing would take place the following morning. That evening, Vernon and Violet stood at Aaron's grave, which they had properly relocated to the small cemetery outside of town. A wooden cross marked the spot, carved with his name and dates. "I should feel satisfied," Violet said quietly. "They are going to hang tomorrow. Aaron has justice." "But," Vernon prompted, "but he is still gone. Justice does not bring him back. It does not give my mother her son back or my siblings their brother." She wiped at her eyes. "I thought it would feel different, getting justice. I thought it would feel like closure." "Maybe closure takes time," Vernon said. "You did what you came here to do. You found him, and you made sure his killers paid for what they did. That matters, even if it does not feel like enough right now." Violet was quiet for a moment. "Will you help me write to my mother? I need to tell her what happened, but I do not think I can find the words alone." "Of course." They walked back to the boarding house together as the sun set over the mountains. Vernon noticed that Violet stayed close to him, close enough that their arms occasionally brushed. He found himself wondering what would happen now. The job he had been hired for was complete. Violet had found her brother and gotten justice for his death. There was no reason for them to stay together any longer. The thought left him feeling hollow. Over the next few days, Vernon helped Violet arrange to have Aaron's body transported back east for burial near their father. It was expensive, but Violet was determined that her brother would rest with family. She also filed claim to Aaron's land, which by law passed to his next of kin. An essay of the claim revealed it was actually quite valuable, which explained why Carter had wanted it so badly. "I am going to sell it," Violet told Vernon one morning over breakfast. "Take the money back to my mother and siblings. It is what Aaron would have wanted." "You could work it yourself," Vernon suggested. "The claim is yours now. I do not want to stay here." Violet looked around at the rough town. "This place took my brother from me. I do not want any more memories of it than I already have." Vernon understood, but he felt that hollow feeling again. If she sold the claim and went home, that meant their time together was ending. He would return to his trading post, to his solitary life in the mountains, and Violet would go back to Illinois or wherever her family had settled. It should not have bothered him. They had known each other for less than a month. But somehow, in that short time, Violet had become important to him in ways he could not quite articulate. Her constant questions, her refusal to accept easy answers, her sharp intelligence and sharper tongue, all of it had woven itself into his daily thoughts until he could not imagine going back to the silence of living alone. "What will you do?" Violet asked, as if reading his thoughts. "After this?" "Go back to the trading post, I suppose, pick up where I left off." Alone, Vernon met her eyes across the table. "That was always the plan." "Plans change," Violet said softly. "Do they?" "They could." She looked down at her coffee. "If a person wanted them to." Vernon felt his heart start to beat faster. "Violet, what are you saying?" "I am saying that I have been thinking about what comes next, about what I want." She looked up at him again. "And I have been thinking that maybe I do not want to go back to Illinois. Maybe I want to stay out here in the West, with someone who makes me think harder, who does not dismiss my questions, who treats me like an equal instead of a burden." "You want to stay," Vernon said slowly, not quite daring to believe what he was hearing. "I want to stay with you," Violet corrected. "If you will have me." Vernon stood up and moved around the table, kneeling beside her chair. "Violet Cain Olson, I would be honored to have you stay, but you need to be sure. Life at the trading post is hard. It is isolated and lonely and dangerous sometimes. I know, I have seen it." She put her hand on his cheek. "But I have also seen you. The way you treat people with respect, the way you think before you act, the way you listen when I talk instead of just waiting for your turn to speak. That is rare, Vernon. That is worth more than comfort or safety." "You barely know me," Vernon protested weakly. "I know enough. I know that you have integrity and courage and kindness. I know that you make me want to be better, to think deeper, to question not just everything men say, but everything I believe about the world." Her eyes were bright. "And I know that the thought of leaving you and going back to a life where nobody challenges me or excites me or makes me feel alive is unbearable." Vernon pulled her close, cradling her head against his shoulder. "I do not want you to go," he admitted. "I have not wanted you to go since about the third day we were on the trail. You infuriate me and challenge me and make me think about things I had stopped thinking about years ago. You make me want to be more than just a man hiding in the mountains." "Then do not let me go," Violet whispered. He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, pouring into it all the words he did not quite know how to say. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Violet was smiling. "So that is a yes?" she asked. "That is a yes," Vernon confirmed. "On one condition." "What condition?" "You marry me. Properly, with a preacher and everything. I will not have people saying you are just living with me without benefit of marriage." Violet laughed. "Is that you being protective of my reputation? Maybe. Or maybe I just want everyone to know that you chose me, and I chose you, and anyone who has a problem with it can take it up with both of us." "I can agree to those terms." Violet kissed him again, softer this time. "When?" "As soon as we can find a preacher who is sober enough to perform the ceremony." They were married 3 days later in a small church that served Kennewick and the surrounding mining camps. The preacher was a weathered man named Father Michael, who had seen enough of life in the mining camps not to ask too many questions about a mountain man marrying a woman from back east. Dutch stood as Vernon's witness, and Mrs. Patterson stood for Violet. The ceremony was simple but genuine, and when Father Michael pronounced them man and wife, Vernon felt something in his chest that he had not felt in years. Not just happiness, but hope. The sense that the future might hold something more than just survival. They spent their wedding night in the boarding house, and Vernon discovered that Violet approached physical intimacy with the same combination of curiosity and forthrightness that she brought to everything else. She asked questions, she challenged assumptions, and she demanded to be treated as an equal partner in all things. Vernon would not have wanted it any other way. In the morning, they began preparations for the journey back to Vernon's trading post. Violet insisted on buying supplies in town rather than relying entirely on what Vernon had stored at the post. "I want to contribute," she explained when Vernon questioned the expense. "This is going to be my home too, and I want to help build it into what we need." "Our home," Vernon corrected. "And I appreciate it, but you do not have to prove anything to me." "I am not proving anything, I am participating." Violet selected dried beans with care. "There is a difference." "Is there?" "Yes. Proving something means doing it for someone else's approval. Participating means doing it because it is mine to do." She looked at him seriously. "I need you to understand that, Vernon. I am not going to be a wife who sits quietly and lets her husband make all the decisions. I am going to question things, to challenge ideas, to have my own opinions." "If that is going to be a problem, tell me now." Vernon took her hand, right there in the middle of the general store. "That is not going to be a problem. That is one of the reasons I love you." Violet's eyes widened. "You love me?" "I do," Vernon smiled. "I probably have since you walked into my trading post and called me ornamental." "I did not call you ornamental. I asked if you were ornamental. Same difference." "It absolutely is not the same difference, and the fact that you think it is means we need to have a serious discussion about the precise meaning of words." Vernon pulled her close, laughing. "See, this is exactly what I mean. You make me think harder every single day." They left Kennewick a week later, with Aaron's claim sold for a substantial sum and arrangements made for his body to be shipped home. Violet had written a long letter to her mother, explaining everything that had happened and introducing Vernon as her husband. She had also included a bank draft for a portion of the money from Aaron's claim, enough to secure the family farm and provide for her mother's old age. The journey back to the trading post was slower than the trip out had been. There was no urgency now, no deadline pressing them forward. Instead, they took their time, enjoying the journey and each other's company. Vernon taught Violet the names of the plants and animals they saw, and Violet told him stories about her childhood, about the farm and her siblings and the life she had left behind. "You regret it?" Vernon asked one evening as they made camp beside a clear mountain stream. "Leaving your family, I miss them," Violet said honestly. "But no, I do not regret it. I will visit them and they will visit us. But this is where I belong now, with you in these mountains. It will not be easy." "Nothing worth having is easy." Violet stirred their dinner, the smell of cooking meat and onions filling the air. "But I would rather have a hard life with you than an easy life with anyone else." When they finally reached the trading post in early October, the aspens were turning gold and the air had the crisp bite of approaching winter. Vernon's post looked exactly as he had left it, solid and weathered and waiting. "Home," he said, dismounting. Violet slid down from her horse and stood looking at the building. "Our home," she corrected. "And the first thing we are going to do is add another room. That single room you have been living in is not going to work for both of us." "Yes, madam," Vernon said, grinning. They spent the fall preparing for winter, expanding the trading post and laying in supplies. Violet proved to have a talent for organization, creating systems for tracking inventory and dealing with the trappers and traders who occasionally passed through. She also proved to be an excellent shot, bringing in game to supplement their stores. When the first snow fell in November, they were ready. The trading post was warm and well-stocked, and Vernon found himself settling into a routine more satisfying than any he had known. He would wake to find Violet already up, making coffee and planning the day's work. They would spend the daylight hours on necessary tasks, then the evenings talking by the fire, Violet asking questions about his past and sharing stories of her own. Do you ever miss it?" Vernon asked one evening as snow fell softly outside their window. "The life you had before, sometimes," Violet admitted. "I miss my family, but I do not miss the person I was becoming." The woman who was going to spend her whole life on a small farm, never seeing anything beyond the next county line, never taking risks or having adventures. Is this an adventure? Living in a trading post in the middle of nowhere? Yes. Violet leaned against him. Because I am living it with someone who sees me as a partner, not a possession. Someone who listens to my questions instead of dismissing them. Someone who makes me think harder every single day. Vernon wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "You know, when I first met you, I thought you were going to be nothing but trouble. And was I?" "Yes." He kissed the top of her head. "The best kind of trouble, winter passed in a cocoon of warmth and companionship." Vernon had spent many winters alone in these mountains, enduring the long darkness with grim determination. But this winter was different. With Violet beside him, the long evenings felt shorter and the cold less oppressive. They read to each other from Vernon's small collection of books, played cards, and talked about everything from philosophy to practical matters like how to improve the trading post's efficiency. In February, Violet announced she was pregnant. Vernon received the news with a mixture of joy and terror. "A baby," he said, still trying to process it. "We are going to have a baby." "That does tend to happen when married people share a bed," Violet said dryly, though her eyes were bright with happiness. "Are you pleased?" "Pleased." "Terrified?" "Excited?" Vernon pulled her into his arms. "All of it at once." "Good, because I am going to need you to build a cradle and possibly another addition to the post, and definitely we need to stock up on supplies before I get too far along to travel." Vernon laughed. "Already making lists." Someone has to be practical. Their son was born in early October, exactly 1 year after they had arrived at the trading post. Violet's labor was long and difficult, and Vernon spent most of it pacing outside the room where Mrs. Patterson, who had traveled up from Kennewick to help, tended to his wife. When he finally heard the baby's cry, Vernon rushed in to find Violet exhausted but smiling, holding a red-faced infant with a shocking amount of dark hair. "A boy," she said. "A healthy boy." Vernon knelt beside the bed, looking at his son in wonder. "He is perfect." "He is loud," Violet corrected. "But yes, he is perfect." They named him Aaron after Violet's brother. As Vernon held his son for the first time, he thought about the man whose name the baby carried, and about the journey that had brought him and Violet together. So much pain and loss had led them here, but it had also led to this moment, to this child, to this family. "Your uncle would have liked you," Vernon whispered to the baby. "And you will grow up knowing his story, knowing that he was brave and that his death brought justice to others." Over the years that followed, their family grew. A daughter came 2 years after Aaron, and they named her Sarah, after no one in particular but simply because Violet liked the name. Another son arrived 3 years after that, and they called him Thomas, after Violet's younger brother. The trading post grew too, expanding to accommodate their growing family and the increasing number of people who came through the area. Vernon built additions and improvements, always with Violet's input and often with her direct help. She proved to have a good head for business, negotiating fair deals with trappers and miners while maintaining the post's reputation for honesty. Their children grew up in the mountains, learning to hunt and track from their father and learning to question and think critically from their mother. Vernon often caught Violet teaching the children to challenge assumptions and verify information, the same lessons she had learned from her own mother. "You are raising a house full of skeptics," Vernon told her one evening, watching as 8-year-old Aaron demanded proof that his younger sister's claim about seeing a bear was accurate. "I am raising a house full of thinkers," Violet corrected. "People who will not be easily fooled or manipulated. People who will make their own way in the world instead of just accepting what they are told. They are going to be hell on their future spouses." "Good," Violet smiled. "Maybe their spouses will rise to the challenge like you did." Vernon crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, a gesture that had become second nature over the years. "You still challenge me every day, you know." "Do I?" "Yes. Just this morning you questioned my assessment of the fur prices and convinced me we should hold out for a better offer." "And was I right?" "You know you were right." Violet laughed, the sound echoing through their home. Vernon held her close, breathing in the scent of sage and pine smoke that clung to her hair, and thought about how far they had come. From that first meeting in his trading post, when she had walked in with fire in her eyes and questions on her lips, to this moment, surrounded by the family and life they had built together. "I love you," he said, "not for the first time and not for the last." "I know," Violet replied. "You tell me every day, and you question whether I mean it every time." "Not every time." She pulled back to look at him. "Maybe just every other time." Vernon laughed and kissed her, a long, slow kiss that spoke of years of partnership and understanding. When they broke apart, Violet rested her forehead against his. "You make me think harder every day," Vernon said softly. "Just like I told you the first time we met. You question everything, and it makes me examine my own thoughts, my own assumptions. You have made me a better man." "And you," Violet said, "have made me trust again. Not blindly, never that. But you have shown me that not all men are dishonest, that some actually mean what they say. You have given me a reason to question everything except your love." They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other while their children played outside and the mountains stood eternal around them. The world continued to turn, seasons changing and years passing, but here, in this moment, everything was exactly as it should be. Outside, the sun was setting over the Absaroka Range, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. The trading post, expanded and improved over the years, stood solid and welcoming against the wilderness. Smoke rose from the chimney, carrying the scent of Violet's cooking. From the yard came the sound of their children laughing as they played some game of their own invention. Vernon looked around at the life he and Violet had built together and felt profound gratitude. He had come to these mountains a decade ago seeking solitude, wanting nothing more than to be left alone with his memories and his work. But Violet had changed everything. She had challenged him, questioned him, pushed him to be more than just a man surviving in the wilderness. She had made him think harder, love deeper, and live fuller. And he would spend the rest of his days grateful for the woman who questioned everything, including the walls he had built around his heart. As night fell over Wyoming Territory, Vernon and Violet Drake stood together in their home, surrounded by the family and life they had created from tragedy and determination, from questions and answers, from two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed. The mountains stood watch around them, eternal and unchanging, while inside their small corner of the wilderness, love and laughter and the constant, challenging questions that made life worth living filled every room. And Vernon Drake, mountain man and trader, husband and father, smiled and thought that he would not change a single thing.